The next concept that we will learn is valuing a business. What is the worth of a business? How much should some business pay to acquire another business? The worth of the firm is calculated through valuation. There are multiple ways to do valuation of a firm, but there is no right or wrong approach. Every approach has its own pros and cons. So let us look at few valuation models. The first valuation model is asset based valuation. This valuation is pretty straightforward. It is based solely on its balance sheet. The difference in asset owned by the business and the liabilities that the business has, that difference is the valuation of the business. Before we look at an example, let us understand what an asset is. An asset is any resource that is owned by the business which produces a positive economic value. Few examples of assets are the cash which is lying with the company, the building which is owned by the company, the equipments owned by the company, and the inventory, the unsold inventory which is lying with the company. Now let us understand what is a liability. Liability is a future obligation of the company that produces a negative economic value. Some of the examples of liabilities are the debt which a company owes to a bank, the taxes which a company owes to the government, the salary which are not yet paid to the worker. These are some of the liability example. So we have learned that in asset based valuation, the valuation of the business is equal to the total asset which is owned by the company minus the total liabilities that the business has. In this example, let's assume that the assets of the company is equal to rupees 5 lakh. This includes the cash, the building, the equipment, the inventory value. So the asset is rupees 5 lakh. The liabilities that the business has, it is some debt which is owed to the bank, taxes, salary, that all together amounts to rupees 1 lakh. So in this case, the valuation of the business is rupees 4 lakh. This is called as asset based valuation. There is a drawback to this way of valuing a business. There are many intangible assets like goodwill which a company has. Intangible assets are those which the company doesn't own physically. For example, goodwill. Goodwill is where the customers think highly of the business, the brand, the business is highly respected. One example can be the Tata. The customers highly respect that company. Hence, Tata as a company enjoys a very high goodwill. So these intangible assets like goodwill, these are not taken into consideration while valuing a business. The next way of valuing a business is comparable transaction valuation. In this, we look at similar firms within the same industries whose products and services are closest to the products and services which is offered by the business. And then we see how they are trading in the stock market, how they are performing. And basis their performance, the valuation of the business is done. This model is very similar to selling a house. While selling a house, we survey the neighborhood and we check what are the prices of the houses nearby. Our house value will be determined by nearby similar houses in a similar neighborhood. Challenge here is to identify correct set of businesses that match for comparison. Ideally, a good match would be a direct competitor in the same industry. As a practice, often 4 or 5 companies are taken for comparison. Let us understand this using a small example. Let us take a small example of a company that sells fruit juices. So we have identified 5 companies that also sells fruit juices. So they are in the same industry and they have very similar product which is being offered to the customer. Therefore, in this case, we can use comparable transaction valuation since all these 5 companies are within the same industry and they offer similar product. To implement this comparable transaction valuation, we need to use the sales data, we need to use the EBITDA of these companies. We also need to see how much these companies are worth, what is their valuation. Using these 3, we can do comparable transaction valuation. Now, the first step is to find out EBITDA multiple, which is basically the valuation of a company divided by EBITDA. So in the first case, the valuation of the company is 6,000 rupees. So 6,000 rupees divided by 1,000 rupees EBITDA, which is 6x. Like this, we find out the EBITDA multiple of each of these companies. And once we have the EBITDA multiple of each of these company, we find out what is the average EBITDA multiple. How did we find out the average EBITDA multiple? We use the average formula, which is 6 plus 4 plus 5.5 plus 3.5 plus 6 divided by 5, which is equal to 5x. Now that we have the average EBITDA multiple, we can easily find out the valuation of our business. The formula to be used is average EBITDA multiple and the EBITDA of our business. Let us assume that the EBITDA of our business is rupees 1,000. So in that case, the valuation is 5 into 1,000, which is equal to 5,000 rupees. There are multiple other ways to value a business, like dividend discount model, discounted cash flow model, which require higher knowledge of finance. Hence, we will not be discussing it here, but we have looked at 2 of the most important ways of valuing a business. Valuing a business is very important in a strategic perspective, because when a business decides to merge with another business or when a business decides to buy another business, in that case a correct valuation is important so that the price which is paid for that business is justified as well as it is profitable in the long run. Hence, valuing a business is a very important topic in the world of finance.